Hello, Mr. Coffey. It's a great pleasure to have you in our TV program, and thank you for your tireless support of Georgia. A few weeks.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you again. A few weeks ago, Hudson Institute published your analytical report titled "Preparing for the Final Collapse of the Soviet Union and the Dissolution of the Russian Federation." This truly brilliant paper should serve as a roadmap for the Western policymakers, as it helps them to avoid the same mistakes as their predecessors made back in 1990s, when after the after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they imagined then that Russia as a threat was over. So, in your paper, you call for the Western countries to learn the failed lessons of the past and not waste resources trying to transform Russia into the Western-style democracy. Instead, you outline assumptions and raise questions about the risks and threats the Western countries might face in case of Russia's failure, and the opportunities and advantages the West might take of Moscow's weaknesses. So, could you tell the Georgian audience a little bit more about the goals, assumptions, and questions you have highlighted in this report, including further enlargement of NATO and the European Union, more specifically, because this is very important for Georgia's future?
Of course. Well, thanks again for having me on your program today. I wrote that paper because I feel like there's no discussion in Washington, D.C. about the real possibility of what I call the dissolution of the Russian Federation and the final collapse of the Soviet Union. Many people think that in Washington talk about the Soviet Union collapsing in 1991. I don't think it collapsed then. I think it's still collapsing today. What we see is the continued collapsing of the Soviet Union. I believe that history has the ability to condense time. So 200 years from now, when historians are writing about the collapse of the Soviet Union, I believe that they will identify February of 2022, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as the final act and perhaps the most consequential act of the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I don't predict when or how if the Russian Federation will dissolve. I don't even advocate for this in my paper, but I do say that policymakers need to start planning now for this very real possibility. In terms of Georgia, I think there are three areas in my paper that really impact Georgia. The first one is what I describe as the West preparing for a big bang enlargement of NATO and the European Union if the Russian Federation collapses. We should have institutions prepared, mechanisms in place to bring the aspirant countries into these groups, into these alliances quickly if we see complete chaos and a breakdown in government in Russia. This includes Georgia, of course. The second area of focus is on containing any fighting, any insurgency, any conflict inside the borders, the current borders of the Russian Federation. And this applies to Georgia because Georgia borders the North Caucasus, where I suspect there'll be a lot of fighting and insurgency if we see a breakdown of central government in Russia. And then the final point, I call on policymakers to start planning for reconstruction and economic assistance for countries like Georgia when it comes to the occupied regions of Shkin Valley and Abkhazia. If we have a complete breakdown in government in Moscow, we could see the liberation of Shkin Valley region or Abkhazia, and we should help Georgia reassert its sovereignty in these regions by helping them with reconstruction and other economic assistance.
So have you already discussed your assumptions and analysis with the representatives of the White House or the Department of States or congressmen? And if so, what are their vision about Russia's possible dissolution and its consequences?
Well, there are only a few, in my conversations I've had in Washington, there are only a few policymakers that are thinking about the possibility of the breakup of the Russian Federation. That's really what inspired me to write this paper. Now, since I've written this paper, I've received some positive feedback from Capitol Hill. There are congressional offices who I think are starting to think along these lines. But you also have to remember that we're in the middle of a very contentious domestic political time right now in Washington, with the new Congress coming in and the old Congress leaving. So there hasn't been much focus on any of these foreign policy issues. But I hope that when the dust settles on Capitol Hill, there'll be more interest by members of Congress on preparing for the potential collapse of the Russian Federation.
So let's speak about our region, I mean the Caucasus and the Caspian Sea region. In your recent article, Why Now is the Time to Connect the Caspian to the World, you highlighted the opportunities our region currently faces, the growing importance of so-called middle corridor through the South Caucasus and the significant role in Europe's energy security the Caspian energy resources might play. What steps should we take to turn these opportunities into reality?
It's clear that the middle corridor is going to become the transit route of the future for the West when it comes to its economic engagement, trade engagement with the Eurasian landmass. Because of the situation with Russia and with Iran, there's too much uncertainty for investors and too much uncertainty for international corporations based in the West to deal with these two countries. So looking at Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan, hopefully someday Armenia will be a part of this if Armenia and Azerbaijan and Armenia and Turkey can normalize. But certainly the South Caucasus in general will become even more important to connecting Europe to the heart of the Eurasian landmass. And there's a lot of important aspects regarding this, especially in terms of energy. Europe is desperate to find alternatives to Russian energy. The Caspian offers a huge potential for oil and gas, but new infrastructure has to be built. The Southern Gas Corridor will soon, in the next few years, be running at capacity. We need infrastructure built to connect Turkmen natural gas across the Caspian. We need to integrate Kazakhstan's natural resources into these transit structures. And the first thing that I think we can do in the West is show up. We haven't had a cabinet level visitor from the United States to Baku or to Yerevan in more than a decade now. Secretary Clinton was the last U.S. Secretary of State to visit Armenia or Azerbaijan. It's been over 2 years since we had a cabinet secretary visit Georgia. And when you get to Central Asia, it's even worse. So I think it's time for U.S. officials to start taking this region more seriously and just start showing up at a very high level and engaging with the region.
So a few words about China. Former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd said recently that Chinese President Xi Jinping considers Putin as a dummy for launching a half-cooked invasion. But Putin is his dummy, his personal dummy and China's dummy. What do you think from the Chinese perspective? What is better solution for China, the current weak Russia or Russia's further dissolution?
Well, Russia and China are partners on the global stage, but Russia is China's junior partner. And there are some in Washington who say we shouldn't be focusing on Ukraine because really we need to be worried about China, we need to be worried about Taiwan. But I believe that these two issues of Ukraine and Taiwan, or Russia and China, are intimately linked. China and Russia are two sides of the same coin. Literally, they're two sides of the same landmass. And anything that we can do to help Ukraine defeat Russia will indirectly weaken China because Russia is China's partner. And anything we can do to help Ukraine to be victorious, I think, will indirectly make Taiwan safer because Beijing is watching how the West responds to supporting Ukraine while China keeps its eye on Taiwan. So I think these issues are very linked, and I don't see how Russia will someday disengage or stop working with China. I think Russia needs China, and I think in many ways the relationship suits Beijing as well.
According to the latest news, several Western countries, including the US, France, Germany, Poland, the UK, etc., are ready to supply infantry fighting vehicles and Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Does this mean the new phase of the war, which will allow Ukraine to carry out larger attacks?
Yeah, this is a very good development, but it should have happened months ago. We finally now decided to provide Ukraine with these armored vehicles, but now it's going to take several more weeks to train the Ukrainians on how to use these vehicles. I believe we should give the Ukrainians everything they need to win. Right now, we hope Russia will lose more than we want Ukraine to win. And we have to start wanting Ukraine to win on the battlefield. And they can win. They've proven they can win. One of the big problems with aid to Ukraine is that the Ukrainians have to undergo some sort of suffering to unlock the next level of aid, or have some incredible victory to unlock the next level of aid. For example, with the Patriot missiles, the Ukrainians had to undergo massive airstrikes against from the Russian Federation using Russian cruise missiles and Iranian drones before we would finally give them the Patriot missile. We should have given them Patriot missiles months ago. Also, the Ukrainians had, in my opinion, it was their success with their recent counterattacks around Kharkiv and Kherson that convinced Europeans and Americans to give them the infantry fighting vehicles, the armored vehicles like the Bradleys, for example. We have to start giving the Ukrainians what they need to win now and not just wait for certain moments in the future.
In your opinion, what is the possible time frame for the Ukrainian war? Can we say that Ukraine will defeat Russia in 2023 and restore its territorial integrity?
It's impossible to tell, so I won't even try to make a prediction like that. But right now, Ukraine is on the front foot. We want to keep Ukraine on the front foot. We want to keep Russia on the back foot. And I will say one thing, 2023 will not be a year of peace. 2023 will be a continued year of fighting because neither side is ready for peace. Neither side wants to talk. And with the Ukrainians on the front foot, they believe that they can win this war. I think they can win this war, and I think 2023 will be an important year.
So, is it possible that Russia will launch massive, large-scale attack on Kiev again?
We cannot rule it out. When I was in Ukraine a couple of months ago, it was a question of when and not if. There'll be another attack from the direction of Belarus. But the big question is, will the armed forces of Belarus participate this time? We're seeing signs that Russian forces are starting to gather in Belarus once again. They could threaten the capital, but right now the Ukrainians are ready for this. They have fortifications, they have defensive lines established, and they also have experience, a lot of experience in defending Kyiv, because they've already successfully done it once. I think there are two scenarios to keep an eye on. Firstly, Russia attacking Kyiv again. Secondly, could be a Russian attack from Belarus into western Ukraine to disrupt the NATO supply lines that we're using to provide Ukraine with the weapons that they need from Poland and from Romania. In both cases, Russia doesn't necessarily have to be successful, doesn't have to be successful on the battlefield to have a successful operation. Just threatening Kyiv, just threatening Lviv in the west or some of these supply lines would be enough for Ukraine to divert precious resources away from other points on the front line. So I think definitely in 2023 we need to keep an eye on Ukraine's border with Belarus.
So, and the final question about Georgia. What do you advise to the Georgian government? What steps we should take, Georgia, I mean, should take to survive and take advantage of the opportunities, the upcoming events, I mean, Russia's failure and dissolution give Georgia?
Well, the Georgian government and the Georgian people should remain firmly committed to Euro-Atlantic integration. I think Georgia's destiny is in NATO, it's in the European Union. The U.S.-Georgia bilateral relationship is built on a strong foundation. I know at times right now there is some friction in this relationship, but overall I'm confident that the relationship remains strong and healthy, and it will do so going into the future. And one final thing about Ukraine and Georgia, to the Georgian viewers, to the Georgian audience, you should be very proud of those young men and women who have left Georgia to volunteer to fight in Ukraine. I met these young men and women when I was in Ukraine recently, part of the Georgian Legion, and they're doing great work, important work, and the courage and bravery that they show is just amazing. So the Georgian people have every reason to be proud of these young men and women who have volunteered to fight in Ukraine.
But unfortunately, not proud of our government. How do you assess our government actions? After 24th in Russian invasion?
Yeah, of course, some of the developments, some of the things that have been said by certain leaders in government have been shocking, to be honest with you, have been shocking to some of us sitting here in Washington. But these are matters for the Georgian people and the Georgian politicians to sort out. There's not much good having someone like myself 5,000 kilometers away give too many opinions. As an American, I know what it's like to always have people from overseas give opinions about U.S. politics. So I'll stay out of Georgian politics the best I can.
Thank you very much for the very interesting and inspiring interview. And I hope that we will have more opportunities to invite you in our TV program and see you in Georgia.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye.